differences in feminist theologies and feminism and the Bible. In fact, that's how we met. Susan was using one of Grace's books in her feminist theologies class. A colleague told Susan that he'd communicated with Grace and asked if Susan would like him to see if Grace would come speak at Oregon State. Of course, Susan agreed enthusiastically. We immediately hit it off, and for years talked about doing a project together, but we didn't know what, and each of us had other projects to complete. Finally, in 2013, we both had time and an idea that became our first book together, Intersectional Theology, an Introductory Guide. This book centers an idea from feminist theories. Intersectionality, the concept that explains how social differences like race and gender shape one another and our experiences within systems of power and privilege, in doing theology. We so enjoyed working together that we decided we wanted to do another project, and that's where the idea for this book started. We both survived childhood sexual abuse. We also survived God, at least the God of our childhood churches. That God willed abuse, or at least allowed it, and then judged us for letting ourselves be abused. We had to survive that God, even long after the abuse ended, while we still held on to those images of God that had enabled our abuse. Later, we learned that God doesn't cause or will or want abuse, any kind of abuse. Rather, God suffers with us. God survives with us. God is a surviving God who experiences our suffering and is with us in our pain. For many survivors, God also has to survive some pretty harmful ideas that make abuse even worse. These ideas may lead survivors to walk away, rejecting any idea of God at all because they can't reconcile what happened to them with the notion of a divine being, especially a loving and just divine being. The church has told us that women and girls are temptresses, that sexual minorities and transgender people are inherently disordered and sinful, that women and children are supposed to submit to the men in power over them, that survivors have to forgive their perpetrators, and that perpetrators don't need to make restitution for their abuse. Many survivors have internalized these ideas to their own detriment. After all, the church doesn't generally encourage us to ask hard questions. For many survivors, holding on to faith is difficult because churches have often taught ideas of God that are thoroughly tied up with experiences of abuse, and the church and individual Christians have often failed to take abuse seriously and do something about it. When someone is abused by a priest, a man who is supposed to stand in God's stead, continuing to believe in a loving God is almost impossible. It's also hard to stay committed to the institution of the church when the church covers up the abuse, moves the abuser onto another church, and tells the victims they're lying or delusional or unfaithful. For many survivors, there comes a time when old answers and patriarchal understandings of God no longer work. There's a break, a point of no return, when we say, "That's it. If that's who God is, then I guess I'm done with God." We each reached a moment in our own journeys when the God of our childhoods no longer aligned with our experiences of a God of love and justice. We realized that we could not hold on to the idea that God controls everything and that somehow our abuse was part of a divine plan. In fact, we came to see that the very notion that God causes or allows sexual abuse is pretty ungodlike in itself. It is a belief that enables abuse and keeps structures of power and violence in place. Healing the soul wounds of abuse requires new images of God that can comfort, nourish, sustain, and empower. For ourselves as survivors, we've had to rescue the image of God from patriarchal theologies that are soul-murdering, abusive, and subordinating. We've had to reimagine images of God from our own places as survivors. For each of us, God had to survive really bad theologies that nearly broke our faith in order for God's love and justice at last to shine through. This process of critique and reimagination is what we more fully develop in this book, and one we hope helps our fellow